Okay, so on Friday, you become Prime Minister of Canada. You know an election campaign is just days away. You've got to win over the hearts and minds of Canadians. So you get on a plane and go overseas to meet with the French president and the UK Prime Minister?
And to meet with the king, too.
I mean, it's a bold idea for a first impression. Not everybody's going to agree with it. Look at, for instance, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe.
Not good, and not good. We don't have a trade war with the European Union today. We are in the midst of a trade war with the United States of America and China, the two largest economies in the world and our two largest export markets and trading partners. To choose to go to the European Union is beyond what I could understand as being in any way impactful or representing Canadians.
I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show Les Coulisses du Pouvoir.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And this is House Party, a weekly podcast diving into the big burning questions driving us towards a federal election. And believe me, it is coming. This week we are asking, was Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip a smart move? So let's get down to business. Was the trip a good move? Dan, what did you think?
I think so. It was surprising.
Yeah.
It surprised a lot of people in Ottawa. Why would he decide to go? And right away, like he's barely sworn in. And he hops on the plane and goes across the Atlantic. It serves a whole bunch of purpose, right? Diversify trade relations. Meet up with the king, meet up with a couple of world leaders that they're really, really well-established world leader. Visiting founding nations of Canada, including, on the way back, stopping by Iqaluit. And it gave him the visibility of a Canadian Prime Minister on the world stage in a lot of newscasts on this side of the Atlantic, on the other side of the Atlantic as well. So I think overall, it's a pretty good play from him on this part.
Jason?
I mean, it's kind of a power move for a Prime Minister of Canada who's just 3 days on the job to book a one-on-one meetings with the King of England, Prime Minister of UK, and President of France, all in one day. That's a pretty big thing to do. And as Dan said, it touches on the trade points, and it touches on one of his big strengths. He knows he's not a polished politician in, glad-handing in Canada. He knows he couldn't, look prime ministerial in Parliament because he doesn't have a seat. But he can look prime ministerial standing next to other G7 world leaders.
Because the other obvious choice would be to go to the U.S., right? Your reception on the other side of the Atlantic is likely going to be much better, right? At least you can expect something. He's known there. He's been around, especially in the UK. The BBC probably knows him. When he walks out the plane, I'm sure they were waiting for him. You got some good play there. It's not the same thing if you go to the White House. You don't know if you're going to win the handshake. You don't know what kind of reception you're going to have at the Oval Office. So if you have to pick, you pick the place where they're going to be nice to you.
Well, and if your name's not Vladimir, can you book a trip that impromptu with the President of the U.S.?
Probably not.
Listen, it was a very demanding schedule. And you know how I know? Because I was on the trip. I was one of the journalists covering the Prime Minister's trip, and I am still, frankly, a little sleep-deprived, but I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
You look great.
Aren't you kind? But I would say let's talk about the other side of this, too, though. Sure, maybe the argument is that he's not great at glad-handing, but when you are trying to sell Canadians on the idea that you are invested in them, when your primary political opponent, Pierre Poilievre, is saying, no, you're just this elitist, high flyer, you've said you're European before, maybe you're making a bit of a gamble, too. So let's dig into this. What got done here? What did he accomplish in the UK and France?
I mean, if you look at the trip overall, not much. If I had to pick up on the biggest accomplishment of the whole trip, it's probably the radar system he announced in Iqaluit. And that's the thing that sounded, or that got the most playback on this side as far as an important announcement on that trip.
And for anyone who missed the news, this is this over-the-horizon radar system. Now, actually, this is something that Justin Trudeau's government announced the intention to do. The big announcement there was,
the money was already on the table and everything.
That's it.
And we bought it from the Australians, not the U.S. It was always going to be that way, but still, it sounds really good right now, given the circumstances we're in.
I mean, I think about going back to Justin Trudeau and his first few trips abroad, certainly his trip to the U.S., where he met with, or when Trump was president, he met with Trump and they created a some bilateral group on women's issues. Or like some business women's issues.
But Ivanka was involved. Yeah,
those are what those. Yeah, exactly. That seems like boy, that's several terms ago, a lifetime, a Trump lifetime ago, it seems. But that's the sort of thing that we're, I think, used to seeing created by some of these big bilateral meetings. These low-hanging fruit, easily accomplishable, something to say we did. It doesn't really mean a whole lot, but it's something. It's these easily accomplished things. Maybe they're processy. And that was missing. And I think we conventionally are kind of drawn to expect something like that from these meetings. And maybe it's that that Carney doesn't play that game. Maybe it's that there was nothing that could be accomplished that quickly. But I wonder, had there been something like that, if people could hang their hat on, we wouldn't be saying what did they come out of it with?
Well, I mean, there was this bilateral security and intelligence agreement with the French, although I had a hard time getting, frankly, some of the officials around the Prime Minister to give me a meaningful explanation of what that means. It feels like a bit of a word salad, frankly.
It's a window dressing.
I actually have a few words that I am very allergic to in international relations, and I got to say bilateral and multilateral. I've never heard anyone at Tim Hortons getting worked up about our multilateral relationship. So, yeah, that's not one that's...
I don't remember producing any kind of news out of something
out of a multilateral.
Yeah.
But I really do think that the point of the trip, as you guys are saying, you have to see everything through this lens of the election campaign. All signs point to the fact that Mark Carney is going to call this election on Sunday. This is part of the campaign, and normally you would not be going overseas, but Mark Carney, is trying to play his Trump card. Can we do that by not playing his Trump card?
Yeah.
Does that work? I don't know. But Mark Carney is trying to play the big card that he has, which is he texts with some of these guys. I understand that he and, when we were in the Élysée Palace and there was this moment where Emmanuel Macron was like, ça fait des années qu'on se connaît, Marc. We've known each other for years. What good friends we are. And the king, the meeting with the king. I mean, Mark Carney gave the king a tour of the Bank of England when he was the governor of the Bank of England. And it was really clear, being around this trip, that these are spaces Mark Carney is incredibly comfortable in. Now, that, to me, politically, that kind of cuts both ways, right? The big argument at this moment is, okay, we need leadership, we need contacts, we need friends that aren't Americans. The whole essence of the trip was, hey, look, guys, we got friends who aren't Americans. I have friends. We have friends, and I have friends who aren't Americans. Again, the flip side is, if the political attack on Mark Carney that proves to be most salient is this sort of, he's elite, he's too elitist, he's too out of touch, he's not concerned enough with Canadians, you can see how your political opponents would try to take leaving Canada and going and palling around with your powerful friends and not having a ton to show for it as a knock on you.
It's a gamble here. It's that they're doubling down on this globalism thing. I think at a time when they bet a lot of Canadians think that we need to have more partners.
So say more on the globalism.
It's a bit of a contrast to Canada First. Canada First, I think that Poilievre and the Conservatives are trying to sell, gives a sense of insularism. I think people realize that we are a trading nation and we need to expand our trade markets. If we can't trade with the state, put everything to the States, sell everything to the States, we have to sell elsewhere. And where's a very natural place for us to sell? With some of our allies, some of our predictable allies that we're not going to tariff ourselves. France, England, Europe. I mean, I think there could have been maybe, if he had had a few more Rolodex abilities, had expanded this to maybe more G7 partners, maybe going to Germany, meeting his fellow Chancellor Merz, talking about the potential for liquefied natural gas over there. I think the gamble is that there are people who, yes, they want to see somebody protecting the homeland, but also expanding our alliances and also expanding our trade relationships. So that's this gamble that he can do. I mean, it would have been really great if he could have, as a lot of people were asking, why can't you get these big defenses? Why can't you get Starmer or Macron coming to the defense and saying that Canada's the 51st state threats will not wash? We won't stand for those. They're playing genteel about those still. Had he gotten those, he could have maybe fortified his the merits of the trip.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that was one of the things that we were keeping an eye on to see. Will we get something a little stronger as far as a statement goes from Emmanuel Macron or Starmer on the 51st state? This being said, I was talking to a good friend of mine over the weekend who doesn't follow politics that closely, but knew that Carney went over to visit France and the UK and was completely thrilled to see him make that choice and not go to the U.S. and not play in Donald Trump's end. And I thought this is your average voter sitting in Quebec, looking at that, thinking that's a very good move, and I support that. So. Could it play against him? Possibly. Does it make him look more elitist? Is it going to be something that the other parties are going to use to hammer at him throughout the campaign? Possibly. But it obviously plays positively with certain part of the electorate. And I'm guessing that's what he's banking on right now.
One of the things that's really interesting to me, like I would have put internal trade on that list as a thing that people weren't particularly interested in. The table's totally been flipped on that. Yeah. I again have friends and family who are like, yeah, well, let's talk more about internal trade barriers. Not a conversation you would have been having 2 years ago in a meaningful way. And I will say sovereignty, a conversation about sovereignty had a very different meaning in Canadian politics 3 years ago, right? If you brought up the word sovereignty or 10 years ago or 25 years ago, we would assume that was a conversation about Quebec's relationship with the rest of Canada.
I'll talk to François Blanchette right now about the way sovereignty is perceived in Quebec, and he doesn't see it the same way he saw it 6 months ago.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting to me that there is this, like, again, going back to what happened on the trip, the people around Mark Carney were very excited that Keir Starmer made this comment about we are two sovereign nations, we share a sovereign, but no one went so far as to say, hey, U.S., back off, leave Canada alone. They're never going to become the 51st state. And Mark Carney faced a lot of questions about that. I am led to understand that even in these conversations that the Prime Minister was having with these world leaders, he still had to do the thing where he was like, hey guys, you know, we're pretty freaked out in Canada. Canadians are angry. They are concerned about this idea of annexing because a lot of places in the world, they just think this is like ridiculous talk and they don't understand it's a visceral thing for us. Now, should the Prime Minister have been able to deliver more? Should Mark Carney have been able to deliver more on that front? It's an interesting question. The UK in particular, I think, is trying not to tick off Trump right now, right? So maybe that, and it's a tricky thing with the king, who isn't a politician and it isn't supposed to be too political. But that's another sort of risk that Mark Carney ran here too, is that perhaps some people would feel that our friends were sort of patting us on the shoulder rather than like having our backs.
It's a big ask that Carney and his crew is trying to do with us. They're trying to say that Canadians should accept that there are these subtle statecraft diplomatic things, like Starmer talking about sovereignty, like Charles wearing a red tie or giving his one of his valets, Canadian valets, a sword or something like that, like all these subtle heraldry things, where at home, we're in elbows up mode, right? We're Mike Myers ripping off his jacket at the credit of SNL to say Canada is not for sale, and here we are expecting our overseas allies, these G7 world leaders, to just say these subtle little things like, oh, you know, if I say this with the right intonation, it means I defend Canada's right to exist. It's a hard sell for the public.
So just so folks understand the way these trips work, and I know you've done them before. You and I have been on trips before, Dan, with various prime ministers. You and I did the Stephen Harper trip to China back in 2014. We've done a few of these. The way it works is that media outlets pay for a space on the plane. So they pay money in order to cover the cost of our accommodations, our food, everything that goes along with the trip.
Nothing's free.
Exactly. So this is not some like freebie prize. We're there to do our jobs and do journalism. What is interesting as a journalist is that you are, you know, maybe only a few rows away from, or several rows away from some of the high-ranking people in the Prime Minister's team, and then at the front of the plane there's a little cabin where whichever Prime Minister stays in. So you just get a better sense, I think, of how the machine works and who the people
better
are.
Understanding, I was about to say better access, but it's not true. I mean, you have access, but it's not great access, but you understand better, and you get to talk to the person who understands more, maybe more directly if you're not sure of something, and it's probably a big advantage of those things.
Yeah, and the two things that I think a couple of things that I came to understand about Mark Carney is, one, it's pretty clear to me that this is a guy who has spent years developing a vision for what he wants to do with the country on like a policy level, on a multitude of policy levels, and he's trying to make that happen now, but also that this is a space that he's very comfortable in, right? So when you have a candidate, and we can maybe talk about this in regards to Pierre Poilievre in a few minutes, but, you know, Pierre Poilievre has tried to take something that is both an asset and a liability, which is his own kind of elbows up attitude, right? That he can be punchy. And he's made ads in Francophone Canada. He's made ads in French that say, listen, some people think I'm too feisty. I'm
Yeah.
a little bit too I can't
Rougher
remember.
on the edges.
Yeah, and he says, well, don't you think that's a good thing in dealing with Donald Trump? Maybe now's not the time for cute. Maybe now's not the time for nice. They're trying to take what Mark Carney has, which is this Rolodex, and make it primarily an asset and hope it doesn't get used against him.
Yeah, that was interesting that he decided to do that in French only, and because he didn't do the same sets of ads in English, and I'm guessing he's trying to soften his image a little bit in Quebec. Voters in Quebec see politicians in a very specific way, and they tend to shift from one party to another because they need to feel a connection with the leader, and that connection doesn't seem to be there right now with Poilievre. So I figured he was trying to get closer to them. Carney, for some weird reason, despite the fact that his French is not that great right now in Quebec, seems to be connecting very well on the competency level. Like he's got the skills, he's got the people see him as the banker, and the banker feels reassuring to them.
To that point, Dan, does him going to France first play particularly well or differently in Quebec?
I think it probably does, and I have some friends who've mentioned that they were pretty excited to see him do that first. I mean, l'Élysée, you show up at l'Élysée, Macron takes you, a big accolade, and then the joint statement. It does feel to Quebecers, it does feel like a certain level of respect for the founding nation that they're from, right? So, yeah, it's certainly not something negative for him.
Catherine, you were at Canada House, the Canadian High Commission in London, when there were those tense moments with Carney and the press. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's all these moments of looking prime ministerial, and probably during the whole trip, the part where he looked least prime ministerial was when he kind of lost his cool a little bit. Although I think there's a variety of opinions about how it went down. So Mark Carney was being asked by journalists about this idea that he comes from the private sector, he has a lot of assets. Is there a conflict of interest? Now, he has already put his assets in a blind trust, which means basically somebody else is taking care of all of his money, his stock options.
He has no say on the way it's being handled.
Yes, so that he isn't making decisions as prime minister that would make him money. Now, his opponents, particularly Pierre, have really seized on this and said, like, well, you knew what your investments were before this, and maybe you might still try to sell out Canada to make yourself some money, which Mark Carney has said he. Not in so many words, but basically he finds that pretty funny because he could have been making a lot more money in the private sector. Why would he become prime minister to enrich himself? But things start getting a bit crunchy. First, Stephanie Levitz from the Globe and Mail sort of says, well, when are you going to tell us more? When are you going to tell us more?
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as prime minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance.
And then CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, gets into the act, and she wasn't in line for a question, but she sort of just raised her voice and said, you've been in the private sector so long. Canadians still don't know what your investments were, what your conflict of interest was. Why can't you disclose this stuff now? How could you possibly not have a conflict of interest? And you could see Mark Carney was not having it. He said,
"Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will."
And you can see he seems morally offended by it. There are certainly some people who like to see politicians stand up to the media. That's part of the reason that Donald Trump is president. At the same time, somebody who is prickly, who doesn't like too many questions impugning their motive, who's sort of talking down to people, I think that can be a bit. I don't think that necessarily looks quite so prime ministerial when you're saying, "How dare you question me?" So maybe not a great moment for Mark Carney.
And I was watching it from this side of the Atlantic because I didn't get to travel with you on this one. But it was interesting to see that reaction because I didn't think it was. It felt to me like it was the reaction from a non-politician trying to become a politician, and I think he needs to grow a thicker skin for those things. But it's par for the course, right? When you travel with the media, when you're on long days like that schedule, you might get a little tired. Reporters might get a little more testy in the way they ask their question. That might be why Mr. Poilievre announced not long after that trip that there wouldn't be a campaign plane for reporters.
For the Conservatives during the election.
Yeah, so we're gonna just follow him,
Chase him across the country.
on our own means. And I don't know if it's going to serve him well or disserve him. It was an interesting choice. It's not the first time we've seen that in Ontario in the past, but I think it's the first time in Ottawa that there's no reporters on the national campaign.
National campaign. Someone suggested to me the Bloc didn't have a bus at one point. We should say the Conservatives are saying that they're going to give the media 2 or 3 days notice of where they're going to be. So we would, in theory, be able to get our cameras and people to ask questions to those places. But obviously it's going to be a bit more challenging. And the Liberals have already gone at them and said, what do you have to hide? Why are you hiding from the media?
So standoffishness with the media was sort of baked into people's perception of Poilievre. He was proud of, those combative moments, the whole eating an apple thing, which his supporters, made T-shirts about. That's not Mark Carney's image. he may have a bit of a reputation in Britain as a bit of a prickly, banter with the press, but here that's different. And here, when he showed that bristling against something was a challenge against him, buckle up. This is going to be a big 5-week election campaign. There are going to be a lot of testy questions thrown at you from the media, trying to hold you to account and make sure we understand everything, the ins and outs of your finances, of your situation, and of your policies, and of your ideas, and of your background. Everybody's going to face some personal questions at some point, and the elbows thrown from the opposition leaders in a debate are going to be way pokier than anything we are. So if you're going to, react that way to members of the traveling media, what are you going to do when Elizabeth May or Jagmeet Singh or Blanchette or Poilievre challenge you?
I want to talk a little bit more about the announcement in Iqaluit, though, and the northern piece of this for a few reasons. One, this was Mark Carney's first trip in Canada. Like, it's true he went to St. Patrick's Day in Montreal and he glad-handed, but to make a Prime Minister...
Very smart move, by the way. The St. Patrick parade in Montreal.
200th anniversary. Congratulations.
It's going to lock up the Irish vote.
But it's... I mean, talk about being surprising that you become Prime Minister and you hop on a plane to, halfway around the world. Yeah. It's also surprising that your first announcement would be in Iqaluit. I think in part, that is because this moment where we're having this conversation about sovereignty, Arctic sovereignty, security, right? Putting all of that at the forefront. I will say he was obviously tired by the time we got to Iqaluit, and that started to show. So maybe there's a bit of a lesson for him in there. But Dan, what did you think about Iqaluit as a choice?
It's sovereignty in the Arctic, military spending, everything just is packaged together, right? I'm gonna protect this territory. We need to put more resources here. I understand that. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do more. It was a smart thing to do on the way back, because why not? It's easy, right? You're flying. It's not that much more complicated to fly over and land in the Arctic before coming back to Ottawa. And so I think it plays well with the whole narrative that it feels they were trying to put on that particular first trip. We'll see if it works, if it carries along the campaign. But I thought it was a smart thing to do there.
I think that part of this trip was strategic in that what can I not do, or what's going to be trickier to do during the 5-week election period.
Heck yeah.
You're not going to just head over for Catherine's favorite word, bilaterals, with the heads of England, with the heads of UK and France. And Iqaluit is a big trip out of the way, but it is, the capital of one of our territories, one of our 13 jurisdiction. So you want to do that during an election campaign, or at least in the run-up to an election campaign. So he kind of ticks those boxes that he wouldn't necessarily be able to tick so easily during the election campaign. The other thing, in terms of the politics of the Iqaluit trip, was a bit of contrast play. Jagmeet Singh was up there earlier. Pierre Poilievre's trip up to Iqaluit, in which he was promising expanded Rangers, a new Canadian Forces base up in Iqaluit, got quite a bit of criticism from the Premier of Nunavut, saying you didn't consult us, you need to have consultations with us. And here is Carney standing and being introduced and praised by the Nunavut Premier. That was really a striking contrast that Carney was able to play there.
I will say the one other thing is it was also Mark Carney's opportunity to remind people that he is a Northerner, right? He was born in the Northwest Territories. We've been talking about him as an Albertan, but I think it is important to talk about somebody else who has roots in Western Canada, which is Pierre Poilievre. And, for that matter, the BC MP that is Jagmeet Singh and their strategies on the ground while Mark Carney was doing this stuff overseas. Jason, how well do you think things were working for the opposition party leaders here while Mark Carney was off doing the Carney's multilateral international tour?
Singh still seems like he's struggling for airspace with so much attention on Poilievre, left over from him being atop of the polls, and Mark Carney, the shooting bullet up, eating much of their lunch. It's tricky for him. Poilievre is also trying to figure out his new place in the pecking order. Their slogan, "Bring it home," seemed like a closer's slogan. Up till now, and now he can't use that. He's leaning more into Canada First, and he brought back his old favorite axe tax, even though Mark Carney just a few days earlier had scrapped the consumer carbon tax. Now Poilievre is trying to tell people, well, we also have this other thing, this other industrial large emitter carbon tax that is going to cause harm to jobs, harm to our economy, harm to trade. And he's trying to sell people on that. That could be a really interesting leap. That's not quite as easy, but it allows him to play offense as opposed to playing defense and trying to out-trade Mark Carney when Mark Carney has the pulpit and is actually meeting G7 world leaders.
And you know what Pierre Poilievre is good at? He has spent, frankly, during the Conservative leadership in 2022 and ever since, he spent a lot of time on the ground with Canadians. He is a very effective communicator, and he's mostly proven to be quite good at connecting with certainly his supporters on an emotional level. Yeah. So the fact that he was in L'Orignal, in Sudbury, right, in these smaller communities, saying explicitly to workers, I know you're worried, I'm concerned about you, I've got your back, that's why I'm here. We don't actually know, I would argue, to what extent Mark Carney is able to make that sort of more affective, more emotional pitch to voters and sort of bring people along that way. So I think there's something to be said for leaning in on the thing that you're good at that you're not sure the other guy can do as well.
It'll be interesting to see him in those same environment because he's going to have to show up in a welding plant at some point or in some big industrial complex.
We've seen him in a steel plant already in his hard
last
hat.
week, and it's okay, but not in a very, very controlled environment. We've seen him on a farm. We've seen him in a community hall in Quebec. Mm-hmm. But when you do that day in, day out, and you need to talk to the workers directly and answer their worries. And I've seen Trudeau do that in 2015 very effectively. I don't know if he can do the same thing.
Well, while I'm listening to you, Dan, I'm gonna argue against the point that I just made.
That's okay.
But I think
sounds like someone who's slightly tired coming back from a long trip.
No, because this is what I love about covering politics, though, right? Is you want to try to think about things from all angles. And as I'm listening to you talk, Dan, it's making me think. I mean, this is going to be a change election. Justin Trudeau. Certainly 2015 Justin Trudeau, the thing he was great at, or certainly, I don't know, was he great at it? He got a lot of attention for it, but I think people also got tired of it, was the hand on heart, hugging, I feel you, I feel your pain. I mean, Mark Carney, I do think he needs to sort of be able to lead people, but there is probably some space for not being that guy, right? Mark Carney.
I don't think people want to see that guy anymore.
But he does there's a line. He just don't need to be able to lead, and the moment is an emotional one. But I don't know that you need Mark Carney. Does he need to be out there sort of hugging people?
Probably not. I don't think so. If you want to make it like a change election, if you want people to believe that they're switching from Trudeau to someone else, I think there needs to be a break between the way Trudeau was doing politics and Carney's doing politics.
But that said, like I was saying earlier, there is this Mike Myers elbows up thing. Mm-hmm. People want somebody to fight for you, and Poilievre is going to be come out as more of the fighter than Carney. And then also we see Jagmeet Singh in some of his ads really leaning into that fighting thing with boxing metaphors and stuff like I'm ready to fight for you. I'm not I don't have the background of the other guys. I'm my own man, and I'm going to fight for you. So. People are really testing what Canadians want, and maybe they want a bunch of things, and they probably do.
Well, hilariously, while we were talking about this, one of the TVs in studio, because we have all the news channels up, just had one of the Conservatives anti-Mark Carney, sneaky Carney. If Carney wins, Canada loses ads, which I think is a reminder to us, actually, that like we're looking at the facts as we see them right now. These attack lines, these lines of conversation, the extent to which they stick and become part of the political narrative, we don't know. It's also a reminder that we are likely days away from this election. But guys, I gotta say, this multilateral gathering of CBC Radio-Canada voices has just been delightful. It's great talking to you guys. And listen, the next time we do it, it's pretty clear the election's going to be on.
We should be in the campaign. That'll be fun.
It's been fun doing this with you guys pre-writ.
Just think about how great it'll be post-writ.
Let's see how it goes during the election.
Okay, guys, that is it for House Party this week. Thank you so much to my co-hosts, Jason Markusoff and Dan Thibeault, and thanks to the production team, Caitlin Crocker, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. Be sure to give us a follow in the podcast feed for The House so you can catch both House Party and my other Canadian politics program, The House, every week. That's 2 shows in one feed. The House drops Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with another big, burning election question.